Hi everyone, my name is Cynthia. Let's talk books and happy 2022. The first order of business on my channel is to finish wrapping up the books that I read in December. So let's get that done. And then later this week, I'm going to start talking about the best books that I read in different genres and different categories over the last year. The first part of this wrap-up video is already up on my channel. So the next book on my list is Born in Blackness, Africa, Africans in the Making of the Modern World, 1471 to the Second World War. So even though there's a limit on the time period it covers, it's covering a huge amount of time period. And the main argument that the book is making is that slavery in particular was key to European interaction and contact with Black Africa. One of the most important pieces of argument that French is making is that the Portuguese were not interested in exploring down the coast of West Africa because they were trying to find a route to the east, to India or to China. That what kept them moving down the coast of West Africa was the slave trade and the search for gold. But eventually even the search for gold was set aside because so much money was being made off of the slave trade. That was a really interesting argument. Another place where the book makes a very important argument is talking about the importance of the slave trade when it comes to the Latin American economy. That section of the book was really, really well done, and I learned new things there. And then the other important point the book makes is that the slave trade really was a key part of the erosion of trust in African governments, because African governments were engaging in the slave trade with the Europeans, and it caused a deterioration in the trust that people had in the government, because they were oftentimes not just selling kind of enemies, but also selling some of their own people. And so that leads to a kind of decay within African governments themselves. So those were the kind of, to me, the arguments that stood out. There's a lot more. This is a long book. And the author even says in the introduction that he's not really doing any new work here. Like, he didn't go into the archives. This is not a work of primary source analysis. What he's doing is piecing together a lot of academic work that has been done by historians and other academics and putting it in one place, because he feels that this argument needs to be made more and that not enough people know about this. Now, all of this is really great. It's really fun. Everything I've just talked about I thought was really well done. The problem I had as a historian with this book was that so much of it is based on secondary sources, and that most of what French is arguing is not really new to the field of study. Like, all of these points are pretty well known for people who read history, for historians. Now, where I think he has a very strong argument is in that most people still don't know this history. So there's this disconnect in terms of the history that academic historians have been doing and how it gets taught, somewhat at the college level, but definitely in like the K-12 levels. And so that, I think, is well done. In fact, French is a journalist, and so a lot of this book is very readable, very accessible. And there are places where it's clear he's done a lot of more recent reading. But then another critique I have is that a lot of the secondary sources that he's using are like pre-2000. And so they're a little bit older sources, books that have already kind of, the field of history has already moved on from. And yeah, so that is it. So to wrap all that up, I think that it's a great book if you're interested in this history, if you never learned this history and you're interested in something that's meant for a wider audience. If you're a historian and have done a lot of reading about this history, most of this is not going to be new. So there we go. The next book that I finished in December was Calculated in Death. This is book number 36 in the In Death series. And this was such a fantastic book, especially the beginning, the premise, the way that our main character Eve Dallas interacts with her group of friends. All of that I found fantastic. And it actually reminded me of why I love this series so much and has pushed me to remember to keep going in the series and in the next year hopefully finish it. So if you're not familiar with the In Death series, it's a long running series. They're up to book 54, written by RObb or Nora Roberts, and it's this kind of futuristic kind of like murder of the week type series. The next book that I read was The Body in the Library by Agatha Christie. This is book number 3 in the Miss Marple series, and I like this. So the premise is, somebody finds a body in their library. It's a dead body, and they have no clue how it got there. They don't know the victim. Nobody heard anything, and people are trying to figure out why. Miss Marple is her usual self, very sharp, very incisive. My only complaint of this book is that there's not enough Miss Marple. I always want more Miss Marple. This book has quite a bit of Miss Marple sleuthing, but I would have liked it a little bit more. The story itself was interesting, and enough at least to keep me reading through this particular book. So definitely have to keep reading more Agatha Christie and more in the Miss Marple series. Next book I finished was A Bite to Remember. This is book number 5 in the Argonaut Vampire series, written by Linsay Sands. And this is, okay, if you don't know this series, it is a kind of funny version of like the vampire lore. And in the series, like, there's a scientific reason for vampirism. There's these nanobots that basically repair the body. And this was a fun fun installment in the series. And in fact, for like 3/4 of the book, I think it was like my favorite in the series so far, because I really, really like the heroine and also the vampire that we follow in this one. So yeah, if you've read the series, you know all about it. If not, if you're looking for a kind of funny, different take on the vampire series, it might be worth a shot. Okay, the next book that I finished in December, I picked up because of Shannon over at That's So Poe. This is A Game for Swallows, To Die, To Leave, To Return, by Zeina, Abirached. So this is a graphic memoir, and it looks like this is actually going to be a graphic series about Beirut when it was a divided city, and what the author went through having been born in the middle of a civil war. So this first installment was really well done. I really liked the images. I liked the story, but it's only one piece of the story. This is why I say it looks like it's going to be in installments, and so you don't get to see kind of everything in this one particular book, and so it leaves you wanting more, but still extremely well done, and introduces or has potential to introduce a lot of people to a history that is not super well known for most Americans. The next book is by the same author, and it's the next installment in the memoir series. This is I Remember Beirut, and another just great installment in the series. This was the one that Shannon talked about in her channel, and she had mentioned that this was like the second in the series, so I like went back and I'm gonna read them in order, and I'm definitely gonna continue reading them. If the author publishes more of these, I will read them. Because it's in a graphic novel format, it's easy, accessible, and really quick. Like, you can sit down and read these in one sitting. So I highly recommend them if you are at all interested in this history or in graphic memoirs. The next book I finished was Mastering Emotions, Feelings, Power, and Slavery in the United States by Erin Austin Dwyer. So I received an advanced reader's copy from NetGalley of this book and hadn't been able to get to it before it came out. So it's already out. It's available for everybody to pick up. And what this book does, it bridges the history of emotions with the history of slavery and makes the argument that emotions and the navigating of emotions was an integral part of a slave system in the American South and in the United States. It does this really well. Some of this history was not new to me because if you've done a lot of reading in the history of slavery, a lot of that is kind of rehashed with a focus on emotions, and that was the part that was most interesting. There are really interesting sections, for example, on children and how children learned, one, that they are slaves in the status of slavery, but also how they learn to manage the emotions of their slavers, both adults and children, right? And how they learn that they need to be keeping track of the emotions of these enslavers in order to survive and to get through it. The other part that was really interesting to me was managing the emotions at the end of the Civil War, right? Because people want to reunite with their families. Slave families were torn apart a lot of times, and there was so much emotional investment in trying to keep families together. And so at the end of the war, there's this moment of celebration because people are free, but also this moment of fear and anxiety over finding family, finding loved ones, not wanting to move away from wherever you were at, because the hope is that you're going to be able to find family members, or that if you move away, your family member is not going to be able to find you. And so all of that focus on the emotional life of people during this period, I found fascinating and really, really great. I've been really into the history of emotions in recent times, and I found this to be an excellent book, and also a great introduction for anybody that wants to start reading more about the history of slavery. I think this does a lot of recapping of that history in a very accessible way. And then the last book that I finished in December was The Bone People by Keri Hume. I buddy read this with my friend in Korea, and we're actually about to talk about it today. So by the time this video comes out, I will have already discussed this book with her. And I am not sure, I'm not 100% sure how I feel about this book. This won the Booker Prize. I think it won it in like the 80s or 90s. This book, I think, came out in the 80s. It is a book of Maori literature. The author is Maori, and the characters in the book are Maori. And you follow this kid, Simon, who washed ashore. He is kind of adopted by a couple in this town. The woman dies, and so the kid is left with his adopted father, although that situation is never legal, the adoption is never legal. This is years later now, and the kid gets into a lot of trouble because he can't speak. He doesn't speak. He can do sign language, and he can write, and because he doesn't speak, though, he has a lot of problems at school. People don't understand. They think he's dumb, and he's not dumb, of course. He just has this barrier, this disability that they're unwilling to accommodate. So he keeps running away, stealing things, and at one point he runs away and goes into the lighthouse, where he is found by Carolyn, one of our other main characters. And Carolyn has been isolating herself with society because of something that happened with her family, and we're not told, we don't know exactly what. Basically, these are all broken people in this story, and then it's really slow paced. There's really not much other plot to tell you here, and most of what I just recapped is before the book starts. So this is a book for people that really like slow pace. Where I think the book was a little bit of a problem for me was that there was not enough character development. If the plot is going to be this slow, then I want a lot of character development and character analysis. And there was a lot of character analysis, but not development. The characters don't really grow until the very end, maybe. That kind of growth at the very end is open to interpretation. It also deals with very difficult topics of child abuse and alcohol abuse, though the book never calls what is happening in the story alcoholism. But to me, it was very clear that there's alcoholism going on. So if those are triggers for you, I would definitely stay away, because that is a key part of the story and happens over and over again. When it comes to the handling of that and the handling of the theme of child abuse, I did not like what's going on here. I think there was an attempt to present things as kind of complicated, when in reality I felt like it was very clear cut to me. There was a lot of horrible things happening, and to me there was no redemption of that. And I think the attempt at redemption was not well placed. So there we go. Those are my kind of limited thoughts on it. This is a book that if you're interested in kind of Maori pieces of literature, you might want to pick it up. But I would caution people about the themes it handles, and caution you that it's an extremely slow-paced book. Like, there are entire chapters where all that's happening is, okay, they're having tea at one place, and then they're having tea and drinking at another place, and then back at the first place, and like that's all that's really happening. And so if you're a plot-driven reader, you're gonna hate this book. Don't bother. It's also a little bit hard to get a hold of. You can get a hold of the physical copy, but like there's no ebook availability of this book. And this is where I think, even though it's not a book that I necessarily loved and like I would say everybody needs to go out and get it, I wish that it were books like this were more widely available, because I'm interested in reading more books written by Maori authors and set in that setting. And I think in order to do that, they need to be more accessible, and more people need to know about them. So that is it. That's the end of all the books that I read in December. So I got some good reading done. I'm in the middle of a couple of other books, but it is time to kind of take a pause and reflect on the year in reading. So expect those videos coming from me. If you have read any of the books that I talked about in this video, or have any thoughts, even if you disagree with me, as long as people are respectful, I think disagreement is part of the conversation. But thank you so much for watching this video, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.